Excellent. Welcome all. Glad to see those numbers coming up. There we are. All right, 36 people. Always let the numbers rise up. Are those real flowers in your background, Shishir? Or is that a painting? All right, we're at 39. You're muted if you're talking. Don't worry, I'll remind you.
Now we have real flowers around, like plants, but not flowers. These are just plastic.
All right, so the numbers seem to have tapered off. This is great. All right, so we're going to get started here. Let me get to that. All right, so welcome everyone to our 7th webinar in our series, Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. I am so happy to have everyone joining us. I am your host, Aaron Stoller. I currently serve in the industrial sector as an applied ecologist for ExxonMobil Biomedical Sciences. I also serve as a senior chair for ESA's public and private sector ecologist section. The purpose of this webinar, for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, welcome, is to share stories and guidance for all job seekers in the world of ecology. For many, I'm really sad to say that these are trying times. If there are any U.S. federal workers who have been laid off, please know that our hearts do go out to you. And we are actively building a stronger support net to help the situation. Stay tuned and look out for some posts on LinkedIn and some emails from ESA. In the meantime, there are an abundance of ecology careers available in state government, industry, consulting, education, and nonprofit organizations. And ecologists in these positions really do lead incredibly fulfilling careers that are helping to translate research into sustainable futures. And they're also generating novel research in collaboration with partners across sectors and in academia. This webinar series is here to help all job seekers identify career opportunities, to broaden networks, to provide a bit of hope for those that are struggling to find their niche or have been displaced from their niche, and to help ESA cast a wider and more inclusive net over the professional ecological world. With me today, I have 2 guests, including Derek Pelletier. I said it the French way, Derek. I hope that's right. Is it Pelletier?
I will go with either. Where I grew up, though, we just said Pelletier.
Okay, Pelletier.
Yeah. Yep.
Who is a technical consulting director with Environmental Resources Management, ERM, which is a very large consulting firm. And Shishir Paudel, who is a plant ecologist at the Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens in Pittsburgh. We will have a conversation with both in turn. I have to say, we often run out of time to answer questions live. So please, please, please ask your questions in the Q&A. There is a Q&A box at the bottom. Be sure to ask the question in there. It really does help. To both of the speakers, you can answer those questions live in the Q&A box. You should have that ability. If not, just message us on the chat and Sandra will help you out with that. The webinar is being recorded, and we will send out any unanswered questions to the speakers afterwards, and we'll update everyone who registered with the answers to those questions. We are also keeping a running spreadsheet of all of the questions, so since the beginning, so we will have that as a blog hopefully soon. If you do feel like asking a question in private, or if you just want to chat with one of the speakers, please do stay tuned for all of our contact information at the end. You should definitely connect with all of us on LinkedIn, via email, however you choose to prefer. And so with that, Derek, I'm going to let you introduce yourself instead of fumbling over an introduction, and also admittedly, because I didn't research your background very much before, so I'm just going to let you start. Let me pin your profile so that everyone can see your face. And go ahead, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing at ERM, and your background starting from graduate school.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Aaron. And yeah, welcome everybody. Exciting to have folks interested in this topic. So happy to share. So yeah, as Aaron said, I work for ERM, which is a large consulting firm. I've been in this role in consulting for a little over 20 years, and I got into it right out of grad school. I entered grad school with the environmental studies degree and really liked the ecosystem component and entered right into a PhD program at Cornell. And after a little over a year, when it was kind of obvious that I didn't know that I was committed to staying in academia, I actually transitioned to a master's program there and started a different project. So ended up completing my master's degree there, and then left in 2001. And then didn't really have a good sense of what I wanted to do. I had this degree in ecology and evolutionary biology. I moved out west and was kind of casting a wide net, right? Like we all do. And was looking nonprofit sector, also looked at government and consulting, and just kind of found some traction in the consulting world. I was lucky enough that my background was in, I would my work had been more in like nutrient cycling and kind of like at the watershed scale and kind of coastal eutrophication issues. And when I was looking for a job, after kind of bouncing around with informational interviews, my resume ended up with a consulting firm that had just won the risk assessment for a couple of large Superfund sites out west. And they were a small firm, and they needed people that they could throw at it, but then also they wanted to understand kind of like habitat component of these projects. And so that was kind of the one thing they hooked on to with someone from my background. It's like, oh, from ecology, you have a really good sense for kind of how habitat contributes to the communities that are there. And so we think that you'll play a good role, like you'll be able to really contribute to this project. And so so they hired me. That was 2001 timeframe. I've been in consulting ever since. All of my work has been in ecological risk assessment for the most part, which is not something that I was familiar with in grad school. I didn't know what a risk assessment was until I started at my job. But I learned a lot about it, and that's kind of what I'm still doing to this day.
So most of the audience is probably also not going to know exactly what risk assessment is.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm nearly 40 years old, and I didn't know much about what risk assessment was until I went into the private sector. So for those of you that don't know, can you please tell us what risk assessment is?
Yeah, absolutely. So on my projects, I tend to work at Superfund sites, so sites that are contaminated with hazardous substances. Pretty much all my sites are aquatic, so they're sites where kind of contaminants have either through kind of surface water discharges or got into groundwater and then kind of made their way downstream, kind of end up either in sediment or surface water in coastal embayments or rivers or bays. And part of the Superfund law is to assess whether the contaminants that are present may be having adverse impacts on ecological receptors that are there. So is it impacting the benthic community? Is it impacting the fish? And the way that we do that is there's kind of a structured approach. There's EPA guidance around this that it's pretty old, but we still follow. It's pretty, it's still quite robust. We try and estimate, well, what organisms are there. So that's kind of building your conceptual site model. What might they be exposed to and at what concentrations? And so that involves a little bit more kind of on the chemistry side. And then how do those concentrations correspond to concentrations that we know from lab studies could have adverse effects? And so then there's like a whole ecotoxicology side, understanding all kind of those lab studies and what those, how to interpret those. And we kind of take those two pieces of information and kind of look at them together and make determinations of whether, their exposure is at levels that are above what's shown to elicit adverse effects in the lab. So yes, it is possible that there could be adverse impacts on the community. And then the next question is, okay, so if that's the case, can you remediate, and how and where, and then that's kind of go from there. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's the gist of it.
Yeah, so that's great. I'll just give a perspective from somebody who hasn't been working in the private sector for most of his career. Um, the reality is that we do things to the landscape, and we are getting much better about that, right? We're doing less harm than we were in the past, and I can speak with authority living in New Jersey, which has the most Superfund sites of any state in the country. That's our claim to fame next to Bruce Springsteen. Um, and I think risk analysis really serves to help us push the boundary even further and make sure that we're polluting less and less by addressing more and more complex models. I'm curious, you said you didn't know what you wanted to get into, and yet you're in ecological risk assessment of different varieties, different flavors. Did you have any ecotox or any risk assessment background before starting work in risk assessment?
No, and that, maybe is something to like, maybe like 20 years ago. That was maybe a little bit more common now, because I like, now when I think about who, when we get resumes for new junior staff positions, there are more academic programs that kind of focus on risk assessment. So people do come in at least in like knowing the lingo and having had some case study experience. I did not. I mean, my program at Cornell was very academic. That was kind of the pipeline. So these kind of more private sector, super applied type questions weren't things that I was thinking about as a graduate student. So it was definitely a learning on the job kind of situation for sure.
What was your approach to learning on the job?
Yeah. So I'm glad that we had this prompt, because it did make me kind of think back to that a little bit, and even to think a little bit more about like how maybe it's things have changed. So because I got hired and kind of came into these projects when this our firm was just kind of like building up to conduct these risk assessments. I had the opportunity to do some kind of like very entry level research to kind of build our capacity. So like I had several tasks right at the beginning that were kind of dig into what you know at these sites we'll often start by doing some kind of like screening, right? Of like, all right, what are the concentrations in the sediment, and how do they compare to these like kind of very conservative benchmarks? We use them all the time. And one of my first tasks was to just dig into how are they derived? What's the basis for them? What's the literature that was used to build them? And so like that was like a little research project that I got right off the bat that really helped me kind of build that capacity. Same thing on the ecotox side. We really built up kind of like a library of from the toxicity literature, where we like actually were doing the Web of Science or Google Scholar searches to find papers, reviewing them, making notes, kind of building our own database. So
So very
that stuff,
much like an academic synthesis, but
that
for a
was
specifically applied problem.
it was, and I think now one of the things I wonder about is I feel like a lot of that stuff, either we kind of don't do those on projects anymore, or like we rely on AI to kind of
Mm.
summarize and synthesize. And while that's super helpful, I think about the fundamentals that I learned when I did that, and I do wonder, like, do we miss out and kind of building up that capacity for people coming into the field if they're not like going in and doing that kind of
That's
synthesis?
interesting. So, I mean, not speaking specifically about ERM or any other company, but do you see in the consulting world a lot of the more mundane, I guess, synthesis tasks being shifted over to AI?
There's a there's a constant sort of kind of pressure to identify,
Okay.
yeah, what are things we can kind of farm out to AI, and like I said, like it's good and bad, right? There's some stuff where it's like absolutely like no one wants to do that anymore, so we should definitely farm that out. But I just hope that we're kind of also thinking too that like there's always a little cost, right, of what we farm out. We want to make sure that we don't lose the ability to kind of build up those fundamental skills or like those basic research skills. Yeah.
When you're looking at potential job candidates, I don't know if you've ever been in charge of hiring candidates
Mhm.
or not, but so whoever, when ERM is looking at job candidates, is it often desirable for them to have some kind of AI or coding background?
So I would say that depends on the role.
Okay.
And that's definitely something that has changed a lot in the past, I don't know, 7, 8 years from my perspective. Definitely now we have, the team that I work with now, we've got people that are kind of coming in with degrees kind of more similar than mine who are, kind of, or like straight out of like risk assessment type management programs. And then we've got analysts, like what we call like our data science colleagues. And for sure, definitely a lot of coding expertise and all that is very valuable for kind of the people in those roles. And having people with kind of coding literacy in my role is very helpful because there's so much kind of quality control checks and conversations that you need to have. So being literate in that stuff is very valuable. But I, and my perspective is it seems like more and more people are coming out of grad school with like at least some level of literacy with those tools. So yeah, it is valuable.
Yeah, that's often what I see. And I ask the question not to encourage people to switch majors or switch degrees to AI or machine learning or any kind of coding literacy, but maybe just to kind of pick up a class or a seminar where you're more informed about what technology can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And speaking of what technology cannot do, so you mentioned starting off your career going out to sites and actually scoping them out. And I don't know what ERM is currently doing, but a lot of those jobs still do exist.
Mhm.
Does ERM also have people that are kind of out of college and going out to the field?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. For sure. Like especially folks coming out with a bachelor's. Yep. There's definitely. I forget what our specific like service line is called, but because it kind of changes over time, changes every few years. But
Consulting companies have a nice way of making job titles sound what they aren't.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, for sure. We definitely have folks that are, in the field pretty regularly throughout the field season. And
Okay,
yep, yep, for sure.
excellent. So, let's talk about different types of consulting companies and why you landed where you are. So have a basic understanding for ERM. They're one of the larger consulting firms out there,
Mhm.
but they're also somewhat of a niche when it comes to what they do. You said you started off with a smaller consulting firm. Can you speak to the different types of firms that you've worked with and the pros and cons of them?
Yeah, yeah. I can for sure. So when I got started, it was with a company that's still around, a company called Windward Environmental. They've grown a bit since then, but there were maybe 10 or 12 of us when I started there. So it was definitely very small, all folks that do the sort of work that I do. So, and I didn't know any differently, so I didn't really have a good sense for kind of what it would be like elsewhere. It definitely felt, you know, both because we were all kind of similar backgrounds at least, and because the tasks that we were doing were, kind of more like these like literature synthesis. It felt very familiar, and coming out of an academic background. And then from there, I joined another company that not as big as ERM, company that was called Environ. They've since been bought, and but I got the sense there of like there's a and sorry, that company was then bought by a this happens all the time too. There's
Yeah.
like always acquisitions. But that company was bought by a Danish engineering company called Ramble. And that was sort of my first exposure to like these companies that are essentially engineering companies that maybe have an environmental component, to address, impact assessment and stuff like that associated with their larger engineering projects. And so I was there for a while, and that was definitely, yeah, I got exposed to a lot more different types of projects at that small firm. It was all eco risk assessment. And whereas at that other firm, and even to some extent at ERM too, like the risk assessment team is a pretty small, cohesive team. We work all over, but there's just not like, enough work in one region to kind of keep us, like I don't work solely in New England, even though I'm based in Maine. We work, globally on risk assessment projects. Whereas all these different other aspects like that are doing more, like more engineering focused, then maybe there is a lot more kind of regional aspect to your work. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm answering your question in a
No,
coherent
that's
way.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
would you say that you are more globally oriented now than you expected to be when you started off your
Yeah,
career venture?
for sure. Yeah, definitely. Because coming out of grad school, right? Like you have your site that you work. I mean, at least most people, like I did. I had like my site that I worked on, so it was like very hyper focused, with the idea of like understanding larger patterns, right? But here, like from project to project, it's as long as you know the kind of risk assessment paradigm, then you can kind of apply it in a variety of ecosystems. So therefore, we do kind of work globally for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
This is just an informal conversation, really. So, I mean, I was just reflecting on my current career and where I was in the past, and I thought I had a good handle on how the world works before I went into the private sector, and then suddenly I like took the Matrix blue pill and just like suddenly realized all of the things that go on around the world, and I find myself in Zoom chats with people across 5 different time zones on a regular basis, and it's so fascinating, I think, to work with that. We do have some questions in the chat. There's a couple questions I really definitely want to ask you here. So one, you mentioned that you traveled west, looking for a career. Were you tied to family? Did you make decisions based on personal choices about where you're going to go? A lot of students or a lot of career seekers are thinking about
yeah.
that option right now. So please speak to that if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely, I would say that this was an advantage that I felt compared to my friends in grad school who stayed in academia, where it's much more you go where the job is. I definitely felt a lot freer to feel like, all right, coming out of grad school, I have a master's degree. It's my chance to kind of figure out some place to be, and I always wanted to move out west. So that was definitely a let's go out there and try that out for a while.
Mhm.
I didn't have family out there, lived out there for about 5 years, and then ultimately wanted to be closer to family, and was able to actually take my job with me at the time and kind of continue, work by telecommuting, which wasn't as common then as it is now. But
Mm.
yeah, so definitely found that kind of that ability to kind of choose where you want to live and then move there and kind of make it work. Um,
Yeah.
that was much more amenable to being outside of academia than.
That's nice to know that you were able to come back to family, though. I think that's a lot of concern from people is, jumping off on what I call the ecological pilgrimage to find your career. You want to travel, you want to get outside of your comfort zone, but a lot of people are afraid, like, well, can I come back? And
Yep.
it's good to hear. It's good to hear that. The other question that consultants get asked a lot by people who are searching for jobs are, have you sold your soul to the devil?
Yeah.
Not phrased that way, but you know the
Yep.
question. So
Yep.
I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, it's 100% something that I wrestled with, when I was in that phase of nonprofits versus private sector, all that for sure. And then still, right? And I think it's a helpful thing to always be kind of checking in with yourself about. I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I will say that every once in a while, I mean, it's been rare. I can probably count on just a couple of fingers instances where we've had clients where we've been like, I don't know that they're acting in good faith or whatever, and like I've just kind of like stepped off of those projects. For the outside of those rare instances, I mean, my perspective has always been that we at the end of the day, our reputation is kind of what we build our career off of, and what allows us to have credibility with agencies and with our clients. And so if you just kind of have faith in your ability to kind of like stick to your kind of core principles and really try and be as transparent when you're presenting data, when you're approaching data as possible, and really just take a scientific approach, that really is valued by both our clients and the agencies. And so that's always a source of comfort to me, that yeah, that is, we can kind of all agree. Like most of the people that I'm working with are also scientists, and the same thing on the agency side. So we're kind of all coming from similar backgrounds. So we all have that common language and that sort of common understanding, and kind of keep relying on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's the answer that I would get consistently, but I think I just was able to integrate something across multiple people that gave me similar answers. Is a lot of consulting companies hire really talented scientists because they want really talented science.
Hmm.
If they wanted a scientist who would sell themselves to the devil, they could get one for a lot cheaper
Yeah.
and elsewhere. So,
Right.
like, there's a good reason for people to hire scientists who stick to their values because
Yeah.
that's what makes a company really good. All right, we're running short of time. There's definitely one question. I always avoid politics, but I can't help it right now. What is your perspective right now on where in the US, maybe worldwide, but particularly in the US, where is ecology going?
Mm.
Um, Given, and if you don't want to answer this, if you want to say like I'll pass on this question, please feel free to say that because we definitely don't
Yeah.
go into it if you
I
don't want to.
I I don't know that I have a good answer. So it's not that I don't want to answer it. I wish I had a better sense for it, honestly. So I don't. Yeah.
Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Have you seen massive amounts of layoffs in the consulting sector
Right.
parallel to the government?
That's great. No.
Okay.
There's definitely a level of uncertainty because it's
Okay.
like kind of wondering like where's this going to go? We're working under oversight of agencies, so it's a little bit of like, yeah, what's going to happen when we can't get documents reviewed because they're short staffed, like questions like that. Like there are certainly ripple effects of that, but in terms of um in my company and then other folks that I know who also work for companies that kind of represent industry side, there hasn't been this sort of like kind of widespread elimination of positions in
Okay.
ecology for sure.
We'll leave it there. I appreciate it. I know this wasn't like on the list of questions that I might ask you or something, but
Yeah.
it's in all of our minds. One last question before we hear from Sandra for a few announcements. I This is the question I'd love to answer. I love to answer. I love to ask. Sorry. What's your proudest moment in your career?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say there's like a couple of pieces to that. At the end of the day, we're working with people. Like my daily routine is on the phone with colleagues, regulators. So I do find just like the mentoring capacity of my job to just be a rewarding part of my job, right? It's just like that personal aspect. So that's kind of high level, touchy feely, but I do think there's ample opportunities for that in this kind of role, and I do find that a rewarding thing. Kind of more specifically, I mean, there's been a couple projects like this where like this is one example where we were working for our client had responsibilities for a Superfund site that had been remediated, and there was part of that remediation order. There was a stipulation that downstream of there, they needed to monitor fish to make sure that conditions were improving. But there was no, and other folks, and I think they were just trying to do it internally before, we're just collecting fish and analyzing them for PCB concentrations. But there wasn't any consideration of kind of the trophic level of the fish, like feeding guild, anything like that. So their data were kind of a mess. And so we came in and developed a sampling plan that took into account kind of the nature of the ecology in the community, try to kind of control for those factors that aren't related to just recovery over time, and we're able to after a couple years of monitoring demonstrate, yep, nope, once you account for these other factors, concentrations are declining, things are improving, they are recovering, and eventually met their targets. And so being able to kind of use that ecology information to kind of try and make sense of things and control the noise a little bit is a gratifying part of my job.
You used your ecology. Oh, it came in
Yeah.
useful. I love it. I love it.
Yep.
Derek, there's a few questions in the chat. One is about where to look. So for somebody who's entering into non-academic jobs a little bit later, where would you go? If you can answer that live, for sure. And then there's a couple other questions that I think could really value from your or benefit from your response. So if you can answer those live while Sandra does or answer those just by typing the answer, sorry. While
Sure.
Sandra does a brief announcement for some up and coming things with ESA, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Derek and Shishir. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Del Rio, Professional Programs Coordinator at the Ecological Society of America. Thanks for joining us today. And this is the 7th session of Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. The next upcoming sessions in this series are April 15, May 13, and June 10th. They're all from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can register for them in ESA's webinars page. I will be sharing all the links in the chat in just a moment. I also want to share some valuable professional development opportunities available through ESA that you can register for. We have an upcoming course titled How to Think Like a Programmer, AI and Code Generation for Data Science, which is starting March 25th. On April 2nd, we have tips and tricks for a successful poster presentation just in time for the late-breaking poster abstract submission deadline for the ESA annual meeting. And we're happy to announce that ESA's Black Ecologist section is launching a 5-part workshop series covering key quantitative methods used in research, ecological research, ranging from foundational statistics to machine learning. These workshops will run monthly from this month of March to July, with the first one being March 13, Foundations of Frequentist Statistics. Additionally, I'd like to mention ESA's Professional Ecologist Certification Program. For those who might not know, ESA has a certification program. It's been around for over 40 years, and you do not have to be an ESA member to get certified. You can learn more about this program at esa.org/certification, or feel free to email cert@esa.org with any questions. Lastly, some important ESA announcements. The call for invited abstracts submissions for the ESA annual meeting will open soon, and the deadline for that will be March 20th. Also, ESA's Mid-Atlantic chapter will hold its annual meeting from April 4th through the 6th at the Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania. Both the abstract submissions and registration are now open for that. And again, I will be sharing all the relevant links in the chat in just a moment. And thanks for your attention. Back to you, Aaron.
Thanks. See some great new questions in the chat. Reminder just to ask them in the Q&A if you can. It will, and I see Stephanie Slatt, if you've raised your hand. We're not taking open messages from the audience. Please do ask a question inside the Q&A box. I promise you, if we don't get around to answering them here, we will absolutely get around to answering them after the webinar and send everybody else the answers. Somebody else asked if the webinar would be recorded, would be announced. We have a link for that at the end. So we're gonna take care of you as best as we can. And I see that Derek, you're already typing some answers to the questions. Thank you very much for doing so. Shishir, let me pin you. Spotlight for everyone. Cancel. Hold on. Remove pin. Pin. Perfect. Okay. Continue. There we go. Okay. It's still not going to work. All right. Anyways. I don't know if this works. Sandra, is Shishir's screen the dominant one right now? No.
Oh, and it's not.
Oh, okay, cool. I think Sandra just did it. Thank you. All right, Shishir, so happy to have you on the Phipps Botanical Gardens, right?
Yes.
This is a place that is near and dear to my heart. I did my graduate work in Pittsburgh for 6 years. I volunteered at the Phipps Botanical Conservancy, and I actually met my wife at the Phipps Botanical Conservancy, probably before you started your work there. But I am so glad to have you on. This is a relatively unique job as far as jobs go for this webinar. So I would love it if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Phipps and where you've come from career-wise.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Aaron, and good afternoon, everybody who joined nationally and internationally. Yeah, this is really a great opportunity, and I kind of refresh. This is sort of a virtual. We had a not exactly similar, but more of like in person in Montreal a couple of years ago. I forgot, 2 years ago. Where I had also chance to speak in a similar sort of format with the audience there as well. So yeah, it's a long history. If I try to explain where I came from. So originally, I'm from Nepal. I born and grew up in, well, we say mountain here, but it's not mountain over there where I born and grew up, around 1,500-meter elevation, what we call hills. Anyway, so I born and grew up and had a bachelor's, actually a master's degree in Nepal that time, but it's a 4-year after high school in botany, where I did a little bit of research on community forestry management and biodiversity conservation. After that, I moved to Norway for my master's at University of Bergen for 2 years. I worked in vegetation ecology in high alpine ecosystem in Nepal, and then went back to Nepal and worked as a consultant for World Wildlife Fund, WWF, for 5-6 months before I moved to Southern Illinois University Carbondale for my PhD program, where I studied. It's very fascinating. I couldn't believe, like, we were climbing mountain and felt really hard to do. But when I went to the wetland in the Gulf of Mexico, I don't know if we are allowed to say that, but it's really different experience because we never experienced with that. So anyway, my PhD was in coastal ecosystem and looking at the impact of hurricane disturbance on native and invasive plant species. And after I finished, now I can remember what Derek was earlier saying. After the halfway through my PhD, I realized, is this the path I want to go? Like looking at how difficult to navigate through the academia and everything. But as an international student, I had no choice. So I had to continue. So there is no any stumble there because immigration things. So this is important for whoever listening and will listen or was this webinar later on who are international and then also located internationally. It's important to realize that there are certain things where you cannot choose because of your immigration status. So anyway, then I finished my PhD and then moved to Oklahoma State for my postdoc, but was totally different system. So I want to also highlight what you do in your graduate schools not always translate into what you will do in the future or postdoc or in your future professional career. So then I went to Oklahoma State and working on Channel Island in California, looking at invasive earthworms. Although I was in the same boat of invasion ecology section, but it was a different organisms I took, not the plant. And then after,
So was this a postdoc?
yes.
Okay. Okay. Just
Yes.
making sure. Okay. Continue.
That was a postdoc. And then after that, during that time, I also work with USDA as well. Although it's not directly employed by USDA because of my immigration status, but with Oklahoma State and Southwest, there is agricultural research station down there in El Reno in Oklahoma. So I look at the intensification of grazing land and then ecosystem service. So after that, that was my time. I was looking for academic position or to go somewhere else, because from very early time, because the way I grew up and then our society, it was a little different, because I was always wanted to connect with the public. You bring your science to the public and also do the research at the same time and mentor student. So I was trying to kind of figure out that is the path I want to go, not directly into the academic position where you are focusing on only research and teaching. It's not that I'm not saying academicians do not do outreach or connect with the public, but I was looking for more directly connecting your science to the public. And at that time I was applying, and then I found Phipps Conservatory the right place to go, because I was here in 2010 Ecological Society meeting, and I had a chance to look at around Pittsburgh as well. I see some hills around. Oh, okay, maybe this reflect where I came from. And then I found the exact matching what I was looking for. You can work in the research field, and maybe you can adjunct a nearby school, university, which I'm doing, and you can teach a course there. You can hire a student from there to mentor them. And at the same time, the research you are doing is translating to the public in every 3-4 months. We do that public events, and then make an impactful contribution to the society. So basically moving here, what we are doing here in Phipps Conservatory is looking at how urban green space is impacting our environment, or the benefit we are getting from urban green space management in terms of ecosystem service to the human well-being. So within that circle, we look at the urban green infrastructure and then ecosystem service, and then how we can mitigate those climate change impact as well in the urban area. So having said that, what I want to emphasize, what you started with your undergraduate or graduate school, you are not always end up with what you are doing in your professional career. So I started with, although I'm putting myself on top of plants, but I don't do everything on plants. So there is all mix up, because you are talking to the public speaking as well, but talking with them, what you eat and what you do in the evening or daytime or in the free time. So those kind of interaction, that's really put myself in like proud moment for myself as well, because I am making some impact to the society for our better future. So I think I'll just stop there for.
No, that's really great. And there's so many questions that I have. I'm gonna try to limit it to what I think the audience would be most interested in. So, how did you pick up skills related to public engagement if you didn't start off on that route?
This is a really good question. And then that was the first question when I was interviewed was asked. I think I didn't have that experience before, but when I was doing postdoc, I had a chance, because Oklahoma State is a land-grant institute. We had to sort of connect with the public, particularly with the farmers. I think the second part of my postdoc, when I was working with USDA. That's where I exposed myself to the public, to farmers. And then you can imagine I came from a completely different part of the world. And then English is not my first language. And you are speaking with the typical farmers in the rural Oklahoma. There was a really language and cultural kind of gap as well. But that was a proud moment because whatever I was telling or I was speaking or translating, it's really they sort of supported me as well. And then also we had this high school program. We go to high school, and then although I didn't feel kind of going into the more academic setting, either school or colleges, I didn't feel that is outreach, but at the same time, that helped you to increase your skill set to speak publicly. And then that's where I kind of got that outreach component into my academic background, and to really tied into to step up into this kind of job.
So I want to ask a lot of questions about what it's like to be an immigrant coming into the US to get jobs, and dealing with the immigration status requirements. I'm going to limit myself to what I ask, but I'm going to ask you this. Would it be all right if people who are in the same situation, maybe coming from another country to the US, would it be all right if they contacted you for advice if they're stuck or if they're not sure about something about the process?
Oh yes, sure. Because I
Okay.
always feel that that's also because it was exactly the same thing happened 2 years ago in Montreal as well. There were a lot of international students because they were in a master's program, and then they were asking me, should I continue PhD, or what is the process, how the immigration works, and other things. And I'm always open. And what I went through, very smooth process for me. And then because I did everything myself without taking any legal advice from others, like hiring any legal advisor from others. So did from scratch myself. So I have a good experience. So I'm happy to help whoever in that situation.
I think that we really actually need to build that particular thing out as a full webinar because ESA, although, it's Ecological Society of America, we really do service a larger international community. And I am not experienced at all in how to advise anyone on coming to this country. I do know, and help me understand the nonprofit research organizations. Um, in the private sector, a lot of companies will sponsor you coming in as an immigrant. They'll even help you with citizenship if that's what you want. If that's not what you want, a lot of private companies are okay with that as well. Was that also your experience working with Phipps, which is sort of an in-between private public sector job?
This is a very good question, Aaron, because I want to know Phipps didn't do anything to me because there are the ways, because I did myself when I was doing my postdoc, because you are eligible for that after you have a master's or even bachelor's or PhD, because there's the term called national interest waiver, where
Can you say
have
that again? I'm sorry.
national interest waiver.
Okay.
Like NIW, that's I think international student will understand the NIW.
Okay.
It is a process you can do on your own without having a sponsor. There are different ways because after your degree, then you have like 2-3 years of grace period, like OPT, what we call, to work somewhere in any place. And it's a little bit different on sponsoring from private sector to nonprofit. In nonprofit organization or academic, you can be sponsored for H-1B for any time of the year, but that's different for the private sectors because private sector is more of a like a lottery. And after that H-1B, then if you want to go to green card, citizenship is this afterwards process. So then you can get sponsored from agency like nonprofit or profit, or you can apply on your own and then get the green card, and then you have more wider space to go for the job.
Okay. Okay. Um, as long as we're on the topic of immigrating and going, so why the U.S.? Why from Nepal to the US? Why not to, well, so you went to Norway first and then you came to the US. Why have you landed in the US? What is particular about this country? Was this where you wanted to end up, or were you happy to stay in Norway if those opportunities arose? Can you tell us a little bit about your thinking along that career path for location?
Thank you very much. That's another very good question. So here's the one thing. I think this is all true. Although when you come and land here and you will find the culture and other thing, when you try to integrate, you may have a different experience. Sometimes you feel really bad about it because of the cultural stuff, versus sometimes you may feel, oh, really good about it because you are coming from the different obligations and other things. So US, what we have heard from early A's, it's a good place to go and have an opportunity and you can excel. And there are other socioeconomic aspects as well. I don't want to go into that because we as ecologists, we don't make that much of money, but we do work for enjoy because we enjoy what we do and we contribute to the society. I went to Norway because I got the scholarship there, because I had that was a government-sponsored scholarship from Norwegian government. So that's why I went there. Initially, I was planning to come here, actually in University of Nebraska at Kearney. And some of my friends, actually friends from Cornell, because we had a Cornell Nepali study program where the undergraduates from Cornell and then other university go to Nepal and then have a 6 month of, I don't know, language and other research experience. And then that time they select people, students from botany and social anthropology to match with them to stay together. And then that's how I was get connected and then found a good thing about US and then research and everything. We started to learn more about the academic standard. And that's why if you ask maybe over 75% people wants to, oh, where do you want to go? US, because you get more opportunity, you have a more wider, better quality education. That's how I ended up. I could have stayed in Europe, but in Norway, I think language barrier played the part not to stay, or it's over there.
Yeah.
Because I want to be just honest, language, but Norwegian, you need to have another language beside English. So
yeah, it's a challenge.
And then I found a really good match. Botany programs I don't think there are any more botany department around the US in university because they all put together in like ecology, systematics, and evolution, all those. And Southern Illinois University Carbondale has really good plant botany program. That's why I moved there for my PhD.
So would you consider, I mean, you're a plant ecologist now, but you're primarily working in green infrastructure and green space in cities. Would you still consider yourself to be a plant ecologist?
Yes, because what we do in green space is basically how I can tell you just like we have a green roof. We have like this, I don't know, probably you have heard, there is a big thing going on around in the cities. These long, traditionally managed lawns have been converted into meadows, and particularly Pennsylvania whole state has an initiative to they provide funding for the public and private and park and like backyard to wherever to convert their lawns into a perennial meadows. This is happening in a real high speed. And then we're looking at whether that conversion is paying off in terms of ecosystem service provision, from carbon sequestration to cultural to human health. So that aspect we are looking at, and it's really good. And then we are working directly with the public and asking them, oh, when did you change your backyard front yard lawn into a meadow? And there are a lot of questions come. So ticks will come, mosquitoes, there's, so no, that is the part I'm working in, particularly also looking at how this conversion is impacting surrounding plant community structure, because in some times, if you don't manage well, these meadows will become a fertile ground for non-natives to flourish. So yeah, it is a lot of work going on, but that is, I still consider myself plant ecologist, more applied with the community engagement in that direction, I would call it.
So for anybody who's interested in green space or green infrastructure, I have to tell you, this is a growing field, especially in the US. There are multiple consulting companies that are now looking into it, and it's becoming a hotter and hotter field of research. I can tell you, like there's so many cool things to look at. The reviews on this are amazing. The green space in urban areas, like it seems to solve half of the world's problems when you get down to it, looking at like people who have chronic asthma or COPD, seeing that they can reduce all of that using green space. It's really an amazing field. And thank you so much for conducting such valuable research in there. Um, the world of botanical gardens is a small one, right? And so I think that there's probably a lot of folks in there being like, well, how in the world can I ever get so lucky to score a job like this? I don't get the sense, though, from my own experience, that it's that rare of a position when you consider the whole nonprofit world. Can you speak to more broadly, like research in the nonprofit world? What opportunities are there?
Well, yeah, it's very difficult question to answer, because it's always, when I take my kids in Stanley Park here, you have been here for 6 years, and then they ask me, where do you work? Phipps. Oh, do you decorate like plants? No, 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 no. That's not like, display is not my job, because there are other part as well we do at the same time, because the conservatory, as we have a lot of huge plant collection, every 4 months we have a new. So that's a separate than what we do research that really impact to our public. They visit us. And then also we do a lot of education. We do with the high school, elementary school, middle school, and college students, try to engage them in a real world situation, and then practical, problem solving, sort of like environment. I feel it's really, everybody who is listening here and will listen, it's not a very lucrative place to work with, but it is a very good place to work in the nonprofit organizations. You get satisfied with, it doesn't have a lot of stress, but at the same time, you are working, impacting the general public. It's not, I'm not saying the private or government are not doing the same thing, but because you are nonprofit, because you have a different sort of obligation, and then you are running in a different way of work format. So it is the whoever wants to work in non-profit or it's like sector, yeah, there are a lot of plenty of opportunities as well. We are hiring, just to advertise here, we are hiring a couple of technicians for the summer as well, working in the urban green space. So anyway,
now you're definitely going to get some emails.
Yeah, to answer that question, yes, it is very well thoughtful, and then also you have a chance to interact with the academic sector as well, because we are living, sitting here next to CMU, Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, Chatham, Duquesne, where I also teach an adjunct there, to build up that relationship and then bring that into your workplace and what you enjoy, and it's become successful. It's not always come up with that, but you try and play a role so everything come closer to you and then make a really good impact.
It's wonderful. We are nearly out of time. So Sandra, if you can just load up the contact slide, that would be great. Shishir, while we have you on the line, I know that there's going to be a question later on. If there is a place where people can go for nonprofit jobs, because LinkedIn is a little weird with nonprofit jobs. If there's a place that you recommend people go, can you just put that into the chat? That would be greatly appreciated.
Yes,
And then
I'll put there because there's a public gardens association of American Public Garden Association and then others as well. I'll put that.
excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And if there's any more that you want to send out to me via email afterwards, I'll make sure to make that publicly available. We are out of time. And Sandra often tells me to get off so that they can do another webinar right after this. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that that's the case. All of our contact information is up on the screen right now. I do encourage you all to just reach out to us either via email or LinkedIn. If we don't respond right away, we're busy. Don't worry, we'll get around to it. But we do encourage networking, and hopefully we'll have something also at the Ecological Society meeting for everyone as well. We are planning our public and private sector mixer, which is very popular. Wonderful chance for people to connect and make new friends. We do have upcoming webinars. We have 3 planned so far, and we hope to keep them going in the future. The previous webinars, the QR code is on the left, and you can see all of the webinars, listen to them at your leisure on the while you're driving or when you're bored at work or something, anything you have. And then the future webinars, the QR code is on the right, or you can just go to ESA's webpage. All of the webinars are recorded. We look forward to having you on for future ones. Shishir and Derek, thank you so much. It is incredibly meaningful to have both of you on here right now, especially in the wake of recent layoffs. It is very nice to see and hear from people in a variety of career sectors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really a pleasure to have it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Catch you
Take care,
guys
everybody.
later. Bye.
All right.